straws, and you know, they're kind of starting to lose their way on us and everything. And this is only the third day, so here we go.
Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go, Anthony.
We're rolling. We finished up cross-examination of the officer that was on the stand yesterday. The cross-examination went really well. In his testimony, he would not admit that what happened was a protest. He said, from my vantage point, from what I saw, because of the number of weapons, because of the way that people postured, because of their clothing even, he said, to me, that was not a protest. Stephen Stewart's attorney in cross-examination said, I would like to take you back to a report that you wrote 2 days after the incident where he described it as a protest. That happened to the second federal agent that was on the stand today during cross-examination. He testified to the exact same thing. This was not a protest. His memorandum, they called it memorandum of activity. His memorandum of activity submitted 3 days after the event on the 12th. He described it multiple times as a protest. Todd Engel, so far, we're on day 6 of the trial. Todd Engel is absolutely batting 1,000. He cross-examined the federal agent today and got this federal agent to admit that from his vantage point, he was able to see federal agents with their weapons raised. Because up to this point, every federal agent that has gotten on the stand has said no federal agent raised a weapon at protesters. In Todd Engel's examination from that federal agent's vantage point, he got him to admit that he was able to see weapons raised. That was absolutely critical, and it was a home run for these guys that are on trial. During the trial, there's a lot of discussion around what's called Post 1 and Post 2. So Interstate 15 is a north to south interstate, but at the section that the Two-Cop Wash is in, it actually runs east to west. So the southbound lane is running on the north side, the northbound lane is on the south side, and there were 2 posts. Post number 1 was the southbound lane just as you pass the Two-Cop Wash and turn right, there's a big pullout. That was post number 1. Post number 2 was the area that we've all seen in the videos. It was the gate set up underneath the southbound bridge. This particular agent, his name was Mike Johnson, he was initially staged at Post 1 because they were concerned about the crowd that was gathering. He was there for 15 minutes. They moved him back, and he was 30 to 40 yards back, standing next to a generator with a light pole. And he testified that from his vantage point, he observed a sniper and a spotter. During cross-examination, they said, well, how far away were they? Oh, at least 200 yards, probably more. How did you observe this? He had a pair of 8-power binoculars. I think it was either Jackson or Perez for Loveling or Burleson, during cross-examination, stood up and said, how do you know that this was a spotting scope? How do you know that this was a range-finding scope that a spotter would use for a sniper? He said, well, it was about this big, and I saw him hold it up to his face. And the attorney says, well, have you ever seen a camcorder? And the gentleman said, yes, but he held it up to his face. And he said, well, why would he hold it to his face? He said, well, because it's got a little eyepiece. He said, haven't you ever seen a camcorder that has a small eyepiece? The gentleman said, yes. He said, so it's possible that it was a camcorder that the man was holding. He said, yes, it's possible. With regard to the sniper that he saw, during cross-examination, Jess Marchese for Eric Parker stood up and said, you testified that you saw a sniper take cover behind a barrier. And he said, that's correct. He said, so what did you observe him do behind that barrier? Silence. He said, you couldn't see him once he dropped down behind that barrier, could you? And he said, no, I could not. So today, the government is really going hard after making sure this is not described as a protest. They've objected during cross-examination if defendants call it a protest. So defendants have moved during cross-examination to make sure that they bring up these memorandums that these agents wrote. These are their official reports, and multiple times they described it at that time as a protest. Another interesting tidbit is that none of them wrote reports on the day of the 12th. And one, in fact, testified that he didn't even make any notes. He had barely had 1 to 2 hours of sleep. He was exhausted during the entire operation. They packed up, they left what they're calling the ICP, the Incident Command Post. He left, he made no notes. It was not until 2 or 3 days later, after he had had time to confer with other agents, that they made their reports. And in these reports, they referred to it as a protest.
What is the government trying to call the demonstrations?
They're not categorizing it anything. The agents that are on the stand reference it as the event that happened on April 12th. So the witnesses so far have not gone as far as to call it an assault like the government has during all of their motions and filings. Yeah. But they are also really pushing back on allowing anyone to call it a protest. And the agents, when they testify, the reason that they say this was not a protest is because people had guns. As far as they could see, there were all kinds of guns. And they have testified that most of them were properly holstered, or the long guns that they saw, for the most part, were slung. So
that's why it was a successful protest.
A successful protest. One attorney got up and said, "You wouldn't categorize this as a protest?" And he said, "No, I would not." He said, "Did you see any flags?" And he thought for a second. He said, "I can't recall." The attorney says, "Do you know what a flag looks like?" And of course, there was an objection, argumentative, and he had to end his line of cross-examination.
Does he know what a horse looks like?
One has to wonder. At this point, like I said, Todd Engel's cross-examination was compelling enough for the attorney that examined that witness to re-examine and to go back and try to clarify things in their favor, what Todd Engel had got the man to admit. Most notably, that they did in fact raise weapons in the direction of the wash, which these agents have categorically denied up to this point that anybody raised a weapon. Really? Todd Engel got this man to admit on the stand that from his vantage point at the generator, which was just north of post number 1, from where he couldn't see into the wash between the bridges, but he could see down just up to the gate. And from that vantage point, he was able to see agents with their weapons raised.
Okay.
So it was, I think it was a tough day for families, because these witnesses are getting into describing things like snipers and spotters, and defense attorneys are coming back and they're planting the seed of reasonable doubt. They're really not going after these guys yet. I think they'll hit them in closing statements, but for now they've been able to sufficiently create doubt that their testimony, at least, is 100% accurate. They were all sleep deprived because of what happened, and they did not write their reports until 3 days later.
So, and the sleep deprivation was caused from what happened a few days before?
The sleep deprivation happened. We found out today that the government took 4 agents from an investigative unit, and they put them in plain clothes, and they started sending them to the rallies that happened off of State Road 170.
Okay.
And what one agent testified today, that from the rally on the 7th, he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. In fact, they were there helping set up the stage and hang banners. They were intricately involved. Wow. They were there talking to people. They were able to point out Ricky Loveling as having been present at the demonstration on the 7th at the rally. But from what they saw at the 7th, they weren't concerned. They called it anti-government, anti-federal agency rally, but otherwise there was nothing they were concerned about. They said from the 7th to the 11th, the situation changed substantially. And all of a sudden, people at rallies were there with guns. And the Bundys had ratcheted up this terrible rhetoric that caused them all to fear that the Incident Command Post, which is where the cattle were being held just north of the southbound bridge, they were concerned now that because of what they saw on the 11th, that the Incident Command Post would be overrun. That caused them to collapse their perimeters, and they immediately caused people to work double shifts. This was starting the 11th sometime in the evening. So people that had already been on shift all day on the 11th were not allowed to go off shift. They were to stay on shift. They worked all the way through the 11th, through the night, into the 12th, when the protest happened under the wash. So they were exhausted. They packed up in a hurry when they decided to leave, and none of them bothered to write a report until they had had time to confer with other agents, and presumably until they had had time to view the national media coverage that happened, because the other thing that was pointed out for these memorandums, especially the officer in post number 1 who stood behind the generator, that testified that he saw a sniper and a spotter, that never surfaced in his written report. It was nowhere to be found in the written report that happened 3 days after the incident. But now, 3 years later, on the stand in front of a jury, now he remembers a sniper.
Yeah, right.
And these attorneys, they're going after it hard, but it's subtle right now. They're planting the seed of doubt with the jury, I think, to discredit this, and I think they'll hit that home when it comes to closing arguments.
Yeah, it sounds like a false testimony entirely.
We were concerned yesterday with Special Agent Stover. He was the assistant special agent in charge. He worked directly for Dan Love. He was asked a couple of really compelling questions. Notably, he was asked, did you see anyone raise a weapon at the wash? And it took him about 40 seconds to answer that. And he said, I do not recall. And we've all seen photos of agents with weapons raised. So we were a little bit concerned about that. And of course, we all know, we're all aware of the ethics violations surrounding Special Agent in Charge Dan Love. We're all aware of the issues with Special Agent Dan Love. They're trying to see if that man had any influence on any of his subordinates, because in the ethics inquiry to his involvement at Burning Man in 2015, he tampered with witnesses. He coerced his subordinates to tell the Department of Interior that they did not recall, even if they did. And he threatened one agent, pseudo-threatened, told her that if she testified against him, that a grenade would go off and she would be hit. That was all in the ethics testimony. They're really trying to tie these agents to see what involvement Dan Love might have had. Special Agent Stover was specifically asked, if Daniel Love were to commit a crime or do something illegal, would you report him? And the man said, absolutely. They then asked Agent Stover, if Daniel Love was to do something unethical, would you report him? And he paused for a few seconds, and he said, well, define ethical. Is it like in a social setting or professional? And they said, no. A professional setting, he does something against agency policies. Would you report this man? And Special Agent Stover stopped. He paused for a second, and he says, I would like to think that I would. Couldn't give a straight answer. So they're really working to see what element of influence Daniel Love is having this. And that's the line of testimony that they have now. The gentleman on the stand this afternoon was one of the gentlemen who was undercover. They were sent in to the rallies, and it was from the rally on the 11th that they decided, because of the presence of guns and because of people in camouflage, it elevated their threat assessment so high that they decided to end the roundup operation. And from their perspective, they felt like they were going to be overrun. That's the narrative coming from me.
Now that agent that testified, was his face visible, or was he behind a screen? Or
all of the agents so far have been on the stand, have been visible. Their names have been read. The names of their co-workers have been read. There was one incident where an attorney started to read a list of names from a document that's sealed, and the judge shut that down pretty quick. So everything that we've heard pretty quick.
Has it been brought out in court that they were sure if the clerk counsel was shut down before?
Okay, so Special Agent Mike Johnson.
How's it going?
He was the one that was at post number 1 that moved back to behind. He moved behind the generator. Special Agent Johnson testified from his vantage point. He could see Nevada Highway Patrol on the bridge, just walking around, mingling with people. And he said to this day he's confused as to why that happened. During cross-examination, they tried to make the point, if Nevada Highway Patrol wasn't concerned with their lives, why were you 200 yards away? Why were you so concerned 200 yards away?
I heard that the sheriff had already told them to stand down prior to the demonstration.
Todd Engel brought that up in cross-examination. He said, did you hear Tom Roberts tell you to sling or hide your long guns? He said, I did not hear that. Did you hear that come over the radio? Special Agent Johnson has testified that he did not hear that. So at some point, if that exists in discovery, that's certainly going to surface, because Special Agent Stover testified that his threat assessment of the situation elevated substantially when Ammon Bundy was tased. And he said, and one of the attorneys stood up and asked about that specific incident. And he said, well, who do you think the aggressor was? That was paraphrasing. That was the line of questions. He says, well, Ammon Bundy kicked that dog in the head, and that's why they sicked it on him. They immediately pulled up the video, and they were able to show an agent point and deploy the dog, at which point Ammon Bundy kicked to defend himself.
Self-defense.
Exactly. So they were able, with video, to get that agent to say, I guess I was wrong.
Well, I heard that the sheriff had already informed Bureau of Land Management to shut down prior to the demonstration.
So the Bureau of Land Management is saying that they decided on the 11th, because of their threat assessment, to end the roundup. However, the cattle that they had there, this is the BLM,
Right.
they say belongs to them, and that they, at that point, were going to take the cattle they had and move along. But because things escalated, especially when the crowd of demonstrators and protesters gathered on the 12th, they thought they were going to, quote, be overrun. So that's where we're at this afternoon. We'll keep going with cross-examination of this witness who was an undercover operative there.
Glad we're getting these undercovers disclosed.
It is.
Yeah,
There were 4 of them. We know who 2 of them are.
Because this has been a real issue with a lot of us who to talk to.
Exactly. Nope, they were right there at the rallies. They were helping set up the stage. They were helping hang banners. They were right there.
They could have been right next to us. You know what I mean?
So that's all we've got for this afternoon. We'll get you guys something for the conclusion today, if there's anything substantive. And
Excellent.
I'm Anthony Depew. This is Andrea Parker, Eric Parker's spouse. So we finished up cross-examination of Agent Sully today. Of particular interest was a piece of testimony that he gave where he said that he was able to observe from his position behind post 2, and we talked earlier, that was the gate under the Sound Bridge. From his vantage point, he could see on the bridge a man with dark facial hair that pointed a weapon at him. During cross-examination, he had written a report 3 days after the incident. He made no mention of a man on a bridge with dark facial hair. In February of 2015, almost a year later, he had an opportunity with the FBI and the U.S. attorneys to make any corrections that he wanted to make to his testimony if his recollection had changed. The only change that he made was that he added in addition that he had been an undercover employee that had attended the rallies. That was not in his initial report. That was the only change that he made. He did not make any changes regarding his testimony that he is now saying in front of the jury that he saw a bearded man with dark facial hair who pointed a weapon at him from the northbound bridge.
They also brought up that he did meet with the FBI and the prosecution prior to coming in on multiple occasions, and that his original testimony did not include that information or the information that he was an undercover agent.
Well, that's perjured testimony. There's no doubt.
That's not the only time that's happened. There's been a couple of instances where an agent wrote a report and they've gone back and said, or they've given testimony in front of the jury and they've gone back and said, well, let me show you your report. I think that happened with Agent Rand Stover as well. The exact incident escapes my mind. I'm sure we've talked about it. That's happened 1 or 2 times at this point.
And what does the judge, is there objections to it? What does the judge do?
Today there were objections on every single piece of evidence that was given. The second half report today was a civilian reporter who was 17 at the time. He was with a contract reporter named Michael Flynn. That man is deceased at this point. But his video is a key piece of evidence for the prosecution here. All 6 defense attorneys are objecting to its inclusion because this young man did not make the video. Right. And for large portions of the video, where Mr. Flynn descends down into the wash, he's down close to the southbound bridge. This particular witness is standing on the northbound bridge, only observing what's being reported. So he doesn't exactly, according to these defense attorneys, there's a chain of custody issue as far as they're concerned. With, at what point did this individual get this video? How long was it in his possession? How does he know that it wasn't edited? Questions like that. To this point, there was a sidebar related to that. They've all been overruled. Everything regarding this video from Mr. Flynn and this young man's testimony has so far been admitted.
Wow.
if we could go back to when we were cross defending, what was the other guy's name?
It was Michael Johnson was the first one this morning, and then we had Agent Sully.
Agent Sully. When we were cross-examining Agent Sully, Todd got up and he asked if Cliven ever came to the protest, and there was objection right away, and that was overruled, so you didn't get to hear the outcome of that. He was asked if you saw Todd at the rally, and this is Todd Engel, not Leventhal. And that was no. Did you see any illegal action? No, that was good. On the 8th, did you see, and this is at the rally on the 7th, this is the undercover agent. On the 8th or the 9th, did you see illegal activity? The answer was no. Did you ever see him anywhere on the 9th, Queen Todd? And the answer was no. And then it was brought up like, you saw people with military-looking clothing. Is that illegal? No, it's not. You saw people with guns. Is that illegal? No, it's not. You saw 4 people on top of a hill with guns. Was that illegal? No, it's not. So basically what we're going into is everything that he saw as an undercover agent, he was going through to build up this case like these people are doing all this illegal stuff, but really, in all actuality, nothing that they were doing was illegal. Then they were asking if the gentleman himself, as an undercover agent, goes into this rally and he's trying to get communications from other people, did he change, or what did he say? Did you try to dispel some of the rumors that were going around about the BLM shooting cows, basically, is what they were bringing up? And he said, no, he didn't. And then they said, well, then did you continue those rumors or add to the propaganda that the BLM are being heavy-handed? And he also said, no, he didn't. So here he's saying that he's collecting information from the people at the rallies, and this is the rally on the 9th, and then again on the 11th. And he's saying, no, he didn't actually put any information into the conversations, he was only taking information out of it. So basically what we have here is he could have been a provocateur at these rallies, and a lot of the things we saw today, a lot of his response was, I do not recall. Do you remember this truck sitting next to you when you were watching the wash? I do not recall. Do you remember this people pointing weapons at the protesters? Well, I don't recall that. And so basically all day long, the gentleman and cross-examination was just, I do not recall. I do not recall.
Agent Sully did a lot of stuttering when it came to what was his role in the rallies that he attended as an undercover agent. Todd Leventhal, counsel for Scott Drexler, says, well, what, were you there talking about the weather? What were you talking about? And the guy said, well, I don't recall. Well, did you do anything to dispel any of the things that were causing people to get agitated? I don't recall. He couldn't recall anything, or says he couldn't recall anything about that conversation. And Andrea brings up a good point. In cross-examination, his position during the protest was behind post number 2 under the southbound bridge, not in the 3 vehicles that were 20 or 30 yards away. He was about 30 or 40 yards back next to an SUV.
You can't see nothing from there.
Well, 20 yards to his right was the blue 4-door Chevy pickup that had the agents with the weapons pointed.
The Park Rangers, right?
Park Rangers. He was asked multiple times, did you see a truck? And they showed the picture. I don't remember seeing that. Do you remember seeing the agents on that truck pointing weapons?
I do not recall.
He did not recall.
So that's on the southbound?
He was behind post number 2, which is the gate under the southbound bridge. So he's between the gate.
So
and
he's
the
actually north of the other freeway then.
That is correct.
Yes, it would be north of the southbound
Okay, I'm sorry.
lanes.
I got the picture, and I was thinking someplace different. Okay.
He was between the gate and the incident command post, and he was situated no more than 20 or 30 yards from a picture that we have of a pickup with agents stacked on top of it, some of them with their weapons pointed. At 20 yards away, he did not ever remember seeing that vehicle.
Any testimony from Dennis Michael Lynch?
Well, we don't know. We haven't seen their witness list.
Anything from P. Love? Any dates or anything?
For Dan Love. I would bet big money that he is never called to testify by the prosecution. His ethics violations at the Department of the Interior are too much of a liability. I don't think we're going to hear from him.
Okay.
The defense will be calling him, though. Some of the other stuff when Todd Leventhal went up, he brought up the fact that in his testimony, he said that after Dave Bundy was arrested, and that video of Dave Bundy being arrested went viral, that is when he then his duties changed and he became an undercover agent. But then when asked that cross-examination, he refused to say that the video had anything to do with it. Instead, it was one of the elements why it went viral, and it was he went undercover because of a post that they made on a Bundy supporting website that, what was it, the Range War Starts Tomorrow, I believe. He did say that he did view the video of Margaret Houston being clotheslined and thrown to the ground. We never got to see the video, but he did say that he saw it. He also said he saw the BLM put up their First Amendment zone, and he was asked if he was aware of BLM shooting cattle. I believe that was exactly right away. He said there was some news of the BLM stealing cattle is how he got back into this, and this is when he said when you went undercover, there's all of these things that people are upset about. These are videos that are going out that are pulling at the heartstrings of, say, animal rights activists, First Amendment activists, constitutionalists, and that it was pulling people in for different reasons. And when you're undercover, did you try to dispel any of those rumors? And he did not.
So, and part of the context of that was this agent made the statement that he feared for his life. They're all saying this, that they were terrified, that they feared for their lives because there were so many people with guns and it wasn't a protest. But he had made a particular statement that when he stood there in his position behind post number 2, he couldn't imagine why the American people would be so angry with law enforcement. And that's where Todd Leventhal came back and said, well, did you see the arrest of Dave Bundy? Did you see the scars on his face? Did you see Margaret Houston? Did you see Ammon Bundy? Did you see all of that? And yet you're shocked that the American people are as upset as they were.
Yeah.
And the testimony yesterday that 2 bulls were euthanized and 27 more killed during the impoundment process.
Say those numbers real loud, somebody.
I don't remember
here. 2 bulls were killed, and around 27 other cattle were put down, and I believe that was in the testimony
and
yesterday.
And that's what the BLM admitted to.
Yes, I believe so. He also said, he was also asked on April 11th if he had a meeting with Love and Schuler, and he refused to say that he was there. But he did know that BLM were closing operations that day, the following day. April 11th, and that it would be public information, so on the 12th people would assume that the BLM had gone. And he said, no, that's unreasonable to assume because the BLM had, what were they calling, assets still left at the site.
They had equipment, trailers, and of course one agent has testified that they believe that the cattle that they had rounded up were effectively deeded to the federal government, so they weren't willing to, at that point on the 11th, leave everything.
They didn't need a travel slip to be able to transport if they were then at that point, once they're deeded. Because usually to go through a port of entry or anything, you've got to have that travel slip to be able to transport the cattle, and that was a big issue.
Yeah, the transport cattle, you got to have a branding inspection documentation. I've witnessed the Bundys do that several times, and they never bypass that anytime they transfer cattle, because I mean it's the proper thing to do. The branding inspector comes in, checks out the cattle, how many cattle are supposed to be, make sure they're all branded and everything, and that has to be done no matter who's doing it. When it goes from across any state line, or even coming from Bunkerville down to Vegas, there still has to be a branding inspection and a documentation to prove it.
Okay, then they called Alex Ellis. He, like we said before, was 17 at the time. He was with a reporter. He immediately goes into his testimony and says that they arrived, what was it, the night of the 11th?
They were there on the 11th,
the night of the 11th, and when they drove in, they were immediately in fear because they saw a couple, 5 to 6 men with long guns, on their bodies. And so they decided not to go that way, and they were immediately in fear of their lives, just showing up at the rally. Then they said they go over to the stage where there's maybe 50 to 60 people, and they're milling around talking to people over there. They decided to go home and come back the next day because many of the people were gone. They then return at 7:30 the next morning to say that there's many more people, they're even more fear of their life, because there's more legally operating humans with guns at the site. Nobody was pointing any weapons. He went into that on a couple times. And then we go right into them producing these images of video. And I find it interesting that they cut them all up. We're going 51, 52, 53. Okay, that's it, right? Then we go 64, 70, 71, 72. Well,
these are exhibit numbers.
In between those video exhibit numbers is the video where the lady comes up to the North Ground Bridge and says, you guys, they need help down in the wash. There's BLM agents pointing weapons. That video they did not show. But the gentleman did ask why they went from the other side of the road to this side, and that's what he said. There was a lady that came and said that they needed help because there was BLM agents pointing guns at the protesters.
And that was at the 11?
No, this is the 12.
This is the morning of the 12th.
The morning of the 12th, okay.
Did they by any chance say why they returned on the 12th if they were so afraid on the 11th?
No, that was never asked. But we haven't gotten to cross-examination. They did say that the protesters were shouting, your court order does not apply here, that the horsemen showed up and then the group rallied behind them. Here we go again, we go 78, 79, 80, we show those.
I was watching that one instead of that one.
Video, he does say to the kid, Alex, he says, write down if you can understand what they're saying on the loudspeakers. And then he was asked, well, what was it that you wrote down? And he said, the crowd needs to disperse, and they had been authorized to use up to lethal force.
Good.
So that also made it in, so that was something good. I don't know if they were he accidentally said that, if that wasn't supposed to be put in there. They did go into a lot of recognizing people on the screens. I believe they pointed out Ryan Payne a few times. They pointed out Pete Santilli. They pointed out
They pointed out Micah McGuire.
So there was lots of that going on during the videos as well. And that's pretty much where we left off at the end of the night, right?
This gentleman's testimony was interesting because the video from Michael Flynn, the government, if you've read any of the filings, has gone to great lengths to exclude or preclude what they call prejudicial information. Mm-hmm. The person recording this film was very panicked about the situation and saying, we have a bunch of people with guns and the law enforcement is scared. This is a bad combination. It's an argument contrary to fact from his frame of reference. He has no idea what state of mind anybody is in, but through this video he's making that judgment. And defense attorneys were very quick to jump on top of that, but of course it's overruled. So this deceased photographer's video where he's making his own commentary and making judgments that can't be substantiated, he can't be cross-examined, there can be no way for these defendants to talk to this person and ask what their state of mind is or why he felt the way that he did, and yet it's admissible as evidence. So on the one hand we have that issue, but on the other hand, as Andrea said, the kid did verify that the BLM said we were authorized to use up to lethal force. Okay. He did verify that a woman ran across the highway to the group of protesters that were in the northbound lane, and she said, hey, the BLM is pointing weapons at protesters. So we did get an independent verification of that. So it was kind of a good and a bad thing, but that was where this gentleman's testimony more or less left off. They'll have some more video clips for him tomorrow.
Good.
And hopefully we'll get into cross-examination.
So what's your feelings in general, the way things are going, you would say?
I personally, I think these defense attorneys are doing really good at planting seeds for reasonable doubt.
Okay.
Everything that the government has proffered up to this point, there's been a reasonable cross-examination. For example, the gentleman that said that he saw a sniper drop behind a barrier next to a spotter. And Eric's attorney, Jess Marchese, was able to stand up and say, so you were 300 yards away, and a man dropped behind a Jersey barrier. How do you know what he was doing? How do you know what he was doing? I mean, for all we know, he could have been tying his shoes.
Yeah.
You know, so they've done a lot to plant the seed of reasonable doubt, and I think when they come back through the rest of their opening statements, through their evidence, and through their closing arguments, they're going to debunk a lot of this, and it's just really at that point it's in the hands of a jury.
Fantastic.
To reasonably judge whether or not this was, as the government contends, a massive, unprecedented, violent armed assault. That's a direct quote from their filings. with a mounted cavalry that formed a skirmish line that could have breached the gate. We would laugh about it if our friends and family weren't on the hook for a life sentence. Or this jury is going to determine if this was in fact a lawful protest, where people were lawfully armed and lawfully exercising their First Amendment rights.
One of the other things that he said in that video, as they're driving, he said, "This is against the law. We're going to get arrested." He said that over and over again, and that was allowed in the courtroom. So he can't say one way or another if it's against the law what they were doing. What they were doing in the video was driving on I-15, so there's nothing about what they were doing that was against the law. And that was also just allowed to be played in the courtroom.
So why is he worried about, now, okay, he's
a reporter.
What's that?
He was a reporter.
He's a 17-year-old reporter.
So why would he think it's even against the law?
Well, it was actually the deceased man that was saying this is against the law. We don't know. We're not allowed to ask him these questions. So basically, we're watching a video where he's driving going, "Oh no, this is really bad. This is against the law. We're going to get in trouble for this.
Arrested.
We're going to get arrested." Yeah, basically.
How old was Michael Flynn when he died?
I don't know.
They didn't show a picture of him? No. I met him. I talked to him when I was out there. That's why I'm asking. I'm pretty sure I know. If I saw him again, I'm pretty sure I do. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brent.
You betcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. I wasn't here yesterday. Carol told me something really funny about how the BLM classified what gear and weapons they were allowed to have. So I want to hear from one of you two, because Carol wasn't going to be a reporter. So can you go back and refresh on that funny moment?
Well, defendants, I don't remember laughing about it, but defendants are going to make the case that the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Park Police were excessively militarized. The government has gone to great lengths to try to preemptively strike at that and paint the picture that these gentlemen, armed to the teeth, were just acting in the normal scope of their duty. And so one agent testified that standard issue is a pistol, with a backup pistol if they want, with a Remington shotgun, with a Colt AR-15. That's standard issue for a BLM or a U.S. Park Police Ranger.
So they didn't say a Remington 270?
They said a Remington shotgun, I think is all that they said. From
and
there,
light body armor.
And they are issued light body armor, but they have the option.
You gotta watch out for those mountain lions, you know.
They are at the discretion of their supervisor. They are allowed to carry hard armor plates, and with that comes a carrier, and with that comes a magazine holder, and all the things that make a land management agent look militarized.
And that's standard issue, and it's typical of them to carry all those things on typical operations. No, it might be his. Is that yours?
Oh yeah, that's
no. You said typical. Did they explain what typical is to them?
No, they did not. They just said it was typical, just like a First Amendment zone is typical procedure. It's typical for you to have that many guns as a BLM agent on any operation, and it's typical to be erecting First Amendment. That's where it becomes laughable, right? It's typical. We do
That's
going
to
to
be my excuse for now on. Typical.
It's perfectly acceptable for a land management agent to roll into a wash, point a weapon at citizens, and then be shocked when they posture defensively. That's what this is going to come down to. It is atypical for citizens, in this case, to exercise their First Amendment rights while being lawfully armed. That, according to the government and all the witness that they put forth, is atypical. So it's going to come down to convincing this jury that what happened was absolutely lawful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Skip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, you guys. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. And that concludes the...
If I can get him.